Superhero games cover a wide range in terms of quality. From top-tier heavy hitters like Marvel Spider-Man and the Batman Arkham series, so-so entries like Marvel Ultimate Alliance and Wolverine Origins, games set around original superheroes like the Infamous series, and even the many LEGO superhero offshoots from Marvel and DC alike, and even epically disappointing flops like Marvel's Avengers. Video games and superheroes are a perfect match, letting you experience your favorite heroes and all their powers and abilities through extensive and varied gameplay options, as well as a rich interactive medium to explore their lore and stories in a more directly tangible way than either the comic pages or the big screen. Amidst this wide range of quality and significance, from the most popular of superhero games to the most despised, one game indisputably fell through the cracks, and it's one of the biggest shames of gaming in recent years because this one was destined for greatness in almost every sense, just to end up slipping into unnoticed obscurity. Whatever your familiarity or outlook on superhero video games, good, bad, or indifferent, know this. If you haven't given Guardians of the Galaxy a chance, you're missing out on the best superhero game you've never played. I'm going to do this review as spoiler-free as possible up to a certain point on the offhand chance that someone here has never gotten a chance to check Guardians of the Galaxy out and might be interested. After a certain point, I'll be talking about some elements of the game that I would definitely consider spoilers, even though I probably won't go super in-depth, but I'll let you guys know when we reach that point so that you can skip around and avoid it if you want to. Before that point, the video will be pretty spoiler-free, but if you want to go in totally blind, especially when it comes to different visuals and set pieces, you might want to play the game first and come back for the rest of the review later. On that note, let's get to the review. Roll it! Let's start with what Guardians of the Galaxy is not. Guardians of the Galaxy is not the definitive XYZ character experience. It is not your you really feel like Spider-Man / Batman / superhero of your choice game. It doesn't play like that type of game, nor does its story follow that type of arc. Guardians of the Galaxy doesn't feel in gameplay or narrative like those games that tread the well-worn, familiar steps of the most beloved and recognizable superheroes in the industry. Rather, Guardians of the Galaxy feels like it is weaving a story all its own, with a narrative, characters, locales, and concepts that belong to the game itself rather than the tried and true origins and best of story arcs that many games and movies alike have taken from pre-existing comics or stories and adapted to new mediums. I'll admit here that I never really read the Guardians of the Galaxy comics beyond the most passing of glances, so maybe this is just a result of my lack of experience with the source material, and if that's the case, if Guardians of the Galaxy the game is a direct recreation of stories or tropes from the comics, let me know that in the comments. But at least for me, it really didn't feel like this at all. When I played the Batman Arkham Asylum series and the Marvel Spider-Man games, I felt like I was playing a recreation of the greatest, most well-known arcs and stories from those respective franchises. Which isn't something I hold against them, by the way. Marvel Spider-Man and the Batman Arkham series are both some of the very best, highest quality, deeply enjoyed games that superhero-centered gaming has to offer, and I've thoroughly played both series several times. And yes, I'm aware that technically speaking, both games did have their own plots and stories. They even explored quite a lot of narrative beats that were a shining example of how to take a deeper dive into different aspects of a character that we often don't get to see. But in the end, regardless of how high quality or skillfully executed they were, these games still felt like they were the same familiar stories retold on the highest level. Guardians of the Galaxy didn't feel this way at all. It felt fresh, new, and endlessly intriguing. It took the source characters, explored their personalities and backstories and individual quirks in a meaningful and expansive way, while taking them through what seemed like a new, untapped direction. We see the team of ragtag misfit spacegoers plunged into a high-stakes scenario that fit perfectly with the source material while feeling like it was original, breaking new grounds in the expanded Marvel universe, and introducing new threats, villains, and elements of storytelling that didn't fall into the pitfall of contrivance or overfamiliarity familiarity that many superhero games and even movies often do. It's a sweet spot that is very, very difficult to land in a sea of games, books, movies, comics, and stories that stick so closely to the source material that it becomes tedious or contrived, or stories that veer so extremely far from the source material that it no longer feels anything like the original characters or story and instead starts to resemble badly written fan fiction. It's a difficult thread to needle, but Guardians of the Galaxy does it masterfully and probably better than any superhero game I've played to date. The game, indeed the source material itself, may lack the iconic familiarity of a Spider-Man or Batman, but in terms of originality and the skillful adaptation of the source material to both a new story and a new medium, I hazard to say the Guardians are second to none. Aside from the unique and original narrative, Guardians of the Galaxy vastly excels in more areas than it comes up short, although there are some of those areas too. Let's talk about audio, specifically music and voice acting. Music is going to be a short discussion as I can't play or feature the vast majority of the soundtrack on Guardians of the Galaxy because 90% of the tracks are copyrighted. And it's a shame because they're all absolute bangers from the 80s. The number of times a song struck up during my playthrough and I had that moment of, oh shit, they got this one too? I love this song. And then started headbanging and singing along was a welcome surprise. You can say it's because I'm an old boomer, and that's definitely true, but the soundtrack is deeply evocative of a mood, a vibe, indeed an entire period of time that the Guardians of the Galaxy firmly and purposefully harkens back to, even though it's set at the farthest reaches of the galaxy. In terms of purposeful use of licensed, well-known music, this is one of the best of any game I've played, period. Outside of licensed music, the original OST tracks are perfectly fine and set the mood well. None of them sound out of place or fall flat, but they're not particularly noteworthy compared to the shining star of the 80s juggernauts. Considering how often Guardians of the Galaxy indulges in the hit tunes, that's perfectly fine by me. Voice acting is spot on in all cases, bringing familiar and new characters alike to life with emotive and colorful performances. These run the gamut from comedic performances with the characters quipping and arguing back and forth in a way that feels very true to the movies.
Pretty sure this is right.
Pretty sure?
Everything was on fire last time.
I couldn't make that happen.
No, Rocket, no. It's a blue wire and two connections, yellow and red, and one big green thing.
Don't touch the green thing!
Not a great time to start yelling, dude. Oh, crap!
You touched the green thing! Get it, you!
To moving, sincere moments of raw emotion that we'll explore a little bit later in the spoiler section. I can't really recall any voice work or performance that felt off, and if there were any, they were so peripheral and minor as to be written off entirely in favor of the solid and compelling work of the voice acting cast throughout. Visually, Guardians of the Galaxy is out of this world. No, you cannot make me take that pun back. This is my video and it will be punny and cringe. The detail packed into much of the environments, from Peter Quill's childhood bedroom to the Milano's worn and familiar interior where the Guardians make their home, to the many varied worlds and galaxy-level vistas you encounter along your journeys. The entire game is dripping with atmosphere and creativity and an art direction that goes all in on the bizarre and exotic alien life that would be out of the question in any superhero experience confined to the simplicity of Earth. I applaud Square Enix and Eidos Montreal for taking full advantage of the setting of, well, the galaxy, to visit a colorful and creative abundance of alien worlds and locations to really pack in the visual feast and unique atmosphere of each location. And all of this feels appropriate and believable for Guardians of the Galaxy's setting, backstory, lore, and tone. Performance-wise, Guardians of the Galaxy was solid for me. I played on the PlayStation 5 on performance mode, and it ran smooth and without any glitches or hitches or other performance issues for me. Although I have no doubt that the game would look even more striking on a high-end PC, the PS5 nonetheless offered a feast for the eyes throughout, and its technical performance and lighting, vibrancy of colors, and various particle effects as well as general visual fidelity was top-notch. As far as I recall, the 60 FPS never hit a hitch even when I was in battles and fights where the various effects were running high and there were all kinds of particles and visual flares going on. There were no problems. games. I noticed some very minor clipping issues once or twice, but nothing so severe or frequent that it detracted from the experience. Now we come to the gameplay, and this is where I admit that Guardians of the Galaxy comes up a bit short. This isn't to say that the gameplay side of things is horrible, simply that with so many high-polished and shiny examples of quality and creativity in Guardians of the Galaxy, the gameplay itself falls short of those lofty accomplishments. Gameplay breaks down into exploration, puzzle solving, upgrades and abilities, and combat, with some extra segments thrown in for fun, such as the rare occasions piloting the Milano in spaceship skirmishes or other scenarios, and by scenarios, I mean frantically trying not to crash. Exploration throughout the many worlds and levels of Guardians of the Galaxy is pretty straightforward and uneventful in terms of actual interaction and variety. Players control Peter Quill, aka Star-Lord, with the other members of the Guardians acting as followers and helpers. Navigating your way through the environment consists of jogging, running, climbing, jumping, squeezing through crevices, shimmying along narrow ledges, crawling through small spaces, sliding down steep slopes, and shooting through certain obstacles blocking your path. All of this is perfectly serviceable gameplay-wise, but never particularly mind-blowing in a wow factor. And I couldn't say the movement system or way you navigate the environment is especially dynamic, but it does vary up your obstacles and progression enough to keep it from just turning into a one-note walking simulator between combat and story moments. Making your way through the fairly linear levels isn't extraordinary, but neither is it boring nor poorly made. The highlight of general exploration is the creative, eye-catching art design and graphically impressive set pieces, and the frequent banter between the Guardians that flow believably well and only repeat itself on a number of rare occasions. I hesitate to even call the puzzles in Guardians of the Galaxy puzzles because they're very straightforward and simple to solve and almost entirely dependent upon simple observation and logic using your teammates' helpful abilities. They give a small bit of variety to gameplay, and it's a nice change of pace, but they don't really challenge your brain, and honestly, I don't think the game would have suffered without them either. Upgrades and abilities are basic and straightforward. You can assign ability points, which you earn through experience, to each of the Guardians, unlocking their special moves that you can order them to use during battles. You can also upgrade Star-Lord's equipment, giving him a few new moves and basic increases to stats such as health, shields, and damage, and some increased mobility. Combat is, once again, perfectly functional, enjoyable, and fun, but it's nothing you're going to remember as revolutionary or unique experience. You play as Star-Lord and Star-Lord only through skirmishes with a solid variety of creatures, monsters, aliens, soldiers, Nova Corps, space cultists, and various other ne'er-do-wells. Star-Lord shoots his blasters, dodges, strafes, leaps around attacks, commands the other Guardians to do various attacks and abilities, and uses special unlockable attack elements from his blasters to deal extra damage and various status effects on the enemy. Combat is probably where I have the biggest gripe with Guardians of the Galaxy, and I'll say up front, it's a pretty weak gripe. All in all, the combat is fine. It gets the job done, it gives us some flash and spectacle and action between story and set pieces, and it's perfectly adequate. It isn't anything more than adequate though, and that's where I have to start critiquing, because Guardians of the Galaxy doesn't deserve an adequate combat system, it deserves an amazing combat system to go with all the other amazing parts of this game. Furthermore, I can see the bones of what could have been a far more engaging combat experience in Guardians of the Galaxy. The framework of something far better that just was not executed well. I played Guardians of the Galaxy on the standard difficulty, so per usual, it's possible playing on hard would have been a drastically different experience. But regardless, it just felt like the combat encounters in the game were far too easy. For the most part, you can just spam commands for the Guardians, fire Star-Lord's blasters, add in an elemental attack here and there, and then the battle is over. Enemies don't do much damage at all, even when they are big bruisers or boss-type enemies, and taking on multiple enemies in a Legion is not particularly difficult either. As I said, there are the bones of a deeper, more engaging combat system hidden under the surface here. You can stun enemies, bind them to increase damage to immobilized enemies, hit enemies with specific elements for increased damage. Some enemies have shields that you have to use a particular element to dispel. The Guardians can use a singular focused damage attack or AoE attacks, status dealing attacks, and Peter Quill's blasters work for different elemental damage modifiers and effects. Certain enemies also have to be disabled in specific ways to progress the battle, and some enemies can be taken out early with a prompt for a finisher. There's variety to combat. There's interesting systems and layers that could have been really engaging and demand the player to be very in tune with things, toggling several moving parts and pieces to really maximize effectiveness in battle. Fights could have been more tenacious, frantic, and intense, forcing you to squeeze out every advantage to survive. But Guardians of the Galaxy isn't any of those potential things. Instead, battles largely feel like you telling the Guardians to wail on the enemies fairly indiscriminately while Star-Lord fires away with his blasters, which range from feeling like pathetic little pew-pew shooters to entirely overpowered death cannons that destroy all enemies far too quickly. There's also a general lack of weightiness and consequence to most actions in battles, both yours and your enemies and your teammates. And this isn't even to mention what a missed opportunity it is that you can't directly control the other Guardians and get experience battling through their unique and specific roles and playstyles. None of this ruins the game. Much of the combat has the benefit of being visually impressive, with monsters and creature designs that are creative and awe-inspiring. I wouldn't even call the combat boring. In fact, in spite of its simplicity and lack of depth, combat in Guardians of the Galaxy is fun, mostly. But I can't help but feel like with some tweaks and minor rebalancing and redesign, combat could have been epic and fully engrossing. Something really memorable and special, much in the way that the rest of the game is. Finally, we get to the writing and narrative of the game. I'm going to mostly talk about this somewhat vaguely and remain spoiler-free as I can, but I'll go into more specific depth after a spoiler warning. The writing for Guardians of the Galaxy is really well done, and I enjoyed it a lot, but it might run certain people the wrong way, and if it does, I can't really blame them. Let me explain. There's a lot of joking banter in Guardians of the Galaxy.
Can you froth? I can froth. Can you twitch?
Yeah, I'm pretty twitchy.
All right. On my cue, you drop, froth, and twitch. While they're all distracted, we take off down one of them side halls.
What about me?
You, well, you take one for the team.
It pretty firmly resembles a lot of the banter and back and forth quips and snark we see in the Guardians of the Galaxy movies. I don't know if there is similar wisecracking and mockery between the team and the comics, but I'm going to hazard a guess that this is on brand. I personally find the jokes fairly well written and well acted, keeping up a constant back and forth between the Guardians that speaks to this mishmashed group of outcasts reluctantly coming together, struggling to get along even as they grow more connected and dependent upon one another. But given the trend of how Marvel and the MCU films and franchises have gone over the last few years, that is, driving the constant humorous, quippy vibe into each and every one of their franchises until it's all just all quip all the time, destroying any hero's chance to be serious or grave. I can definitely understand if someone who has sat through a lot of these shows and movies is having Marvel fatigue and, having looked at the writing of the Guardians of the Galaxy, violently cringes. I checked out of the MCU entirely around Endgame, so I don't really have much of that fatigue myself, so the joking and bantering nature of Guardians of the Galaxy didn't really bother me. The writing was solidly handled beyond the witticisms, with plenty of substance and thoughtful examination of the characters themselves. I was honestly surprised by how well handled each character's backstory, emotional journeys, and character development was handled throughout the course of the game. The main plotline was believably epic and urgent, even as it remained personal and close to the characters' hearts. I'm honestly impressed by how interesting and compelling the narrative and storyline in Guardians of the Galaxy has turned out to be, and while I am far more familiar with characters, conflicts, and villains' story arcs of superheroes like Spider-Man and Batman and the like, I think Guardians of the Galaxy may honestly have my favorite narrative arc and writing of any superhero game that I've played. And with heavy hitters, high-quality games like Marvel Spider-Man and the Arkham trilogy, that's saying a hell of a lot. We're gonna go into spoilers now to discuss some of the more meaningful and interesting story elements, so if you have any intention of playing Guardians of the Galaxy for yourself, jump ahead to the time on screen to keep the review spoiler-free. I will now tidy my beard to give you a chance to click away. Beard tidying complete. The music, the visuals, the art direction of Guardians of the Galaxy are major heavy hitters in this game, there's no doubt of that. But by the time the credits roll, the real MVP of the game really are the characters, the writing behind them, and the ways these characters explore deeper themes than I expected to find in a superhero game adapted from a comic book about a man-child, an assassin, an anamorphic raccoon,
Don't call me a raccoon!
a space barbarian warrior poet who is probably on the spectrum, and the most iconic plant-based character since Little Shop of Horrors.
Feed me Seymour. Feed me all night long.
As mentioned a moment ago, the humor and back-and-forth banter of many interactions between the Guardians is ever present and an essential element of the chemistry that makes the team interesting and compelling. This serves as the oil, the lubricant that keeps everything running smooth and steady. It helps ease the friction of the tenser moments and keeps everything in the game moving along snappy and quick-witted and engaging. It doesn't feel obtrusive to me. I don't feel like jokes are being constantly tossed out by the team for the sake of cheap laughs and easy cheese, though there is some of that, sure. Rather, jokes feel like a natural part of the interactions with these characters in the same way jokes are natural between soldiers who have seen too much death and loss. So they tell crass and biting jokes. Gallows humor that only they can appreciate because it's the only way they can find to speak. Guardians of the Galaxy tells a lot of stories, but its most central and most soulful is a story of trauma, loss, and grief. Each of the Guardians brings their ghost to the table with them. All of the Guardians are misfits, outcasts, and bear the scars of a past that has damaged them in some way. Star-Lord watched his mother killed before his eyes and was taken from his home on Earth to be flung into the wider alien galaxy before he could even reach adulthood. We see in many ways that he is still something of a child, a man but still a boy grappling with his own unrealized responsibilities and inadequacies, even as he is contending with forces and events far beyond the capability of most men, even as he does everything in his power to be a leader and a guide for his friends and fellow Guardians. In addition to a whole list of trauma he suffered being experimented on by the Kree, Rocket has some more specific trauma and grief centered around losing someone important to him named Lila.
What we didn't know, what I didn't know, was that the lab was protected by sentry bots. We got to the security fence and Lila covered me while I hacked the modulator frequency, and as soon as it opened, she pushed me through the door. I heard her die, Quill.
Rocket.
Gamora was brought up by Thanos himself to be a child soldier and assassin. And on top of the hell that must have been, she also had to deal with the compounded trauma of killing her own sister.
By me.
You killed your sister?
She is the one you saw in the Matriarch's promise.
That's how I knew it was a lie. The nebula I knew had been twisted into a hateful, vengeful monster thing. One who would never stop unless I stopped her. So I did. I just never expected to survive.
Why didn't you say something?
It's not exactly a conversation starter. Hi, I'm Gamora. I murdered my sister. Can we be friends? Of course we can't. How can you be friends with a monster?
Drax watched his wife and daughter, who he loved more dearly than his own life, and put the entirety of his care into, slaughtered before his very eyes. He never faced the soul-deep hole the loss of his wife and daughter left behind.
My Camaria. My innocent little Camaria. She was the best of us both. Despite her meager stature, they both were. Quill. My family is gone. What sits before me?
I don't know. But it's not real. And it ain't good.
Groot is a tree man. Yet even Groot, unable to communicate with anyone but Rocket anyway, has a tangible old sadness to him that we can often feel as he utters a weary, deep Groot's loss and grief isn't really explored, but, you know, last of his kind, the only known floral colossi left in the entire galaxy. That's gotta kinda suck. It's gotta suck a little bit. During the course of the game, we explore all of the trauma, loss, and grief of the team to varying degrees, and these segments are some of the best, most powerful moments handled with surprising care and consideration. One generally doesn't look to video games for thoughtful exploration of some of these most heavy and painful of human experiences, especially one with all the bright energy and boisterous flair of Guardians of the Galaxy. Yet, in terms of games that have taken as close a look at human tragedy and more pointedly how we navigate life after enduring these painful moments, the list of games that have done as solid a job as Guardians of the Galaxy is a very short one. Guardians of the Galaxy weaves these themes even further into the overall narrative, extrapolating the struggle of grief and loss and how to process pain and incorporating it into a life worth living from the individual characters' experiences and into an overarching plot that blends heartfelt themes and galaxy-level threats in a way that is believable, meaningful, and fulfilling. It's always a fine line games play when blending emotionally charged topics with action-heavy, thrilling spectacles, one which all too easily ends up turning major plot developments into sappy, awkwardly delivered morality speeches or a textbook example of tone-deaf ludonarrative dissonance. Guardians of the Galaxy pulls off the hat trick, navigating these pitfalls and delivering a narrative that is exciting, funny, and a meaningful exploration of real, thoughtful human experiences that resonate with a near universal struggle of loss and pain. The very best of the best superhero games are touted as making you feel like the superhero of choice. There's a lot of other fundamental aspects of great superhero games, obviously, a lot of quality and essential designs that make it truly stand out. But there's something about feeling like a real embodiment of what makes that hero unique and engaging that makes the experience shine. I never felt like a Guardian when I played Guardians of the Galaxy. Embodying that heroic mythos wasn't part of the experience for me. Rather, I felt like I was witnessing a phenomenally fleshed out, well-realized worlds, a creative, unique art direction, and a surprisingly deep, intelligent exploration of the cast of characters and their relationship to their past and each other that helps to ground the game in a human side we rarely see when dealing with superheroes, all the while not interfering with the epic scale of a galactic-level super threat that culminates in an epic battle for the fate of billions of lives. All set to the thundering beat of some truly badass tunes that I can't play here for copyright reasons, but trust me, they're great. Guardians of the Galaxy is quite possibly the most underrated, underappreciated superhero game of all time. But maybe if I've done my job right, there'll be at least one more person taking a trek through the stars.